Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for...
It's the Real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy Sports Ticket, 1430 AM and 99.5 HD2.
What's going on? It's the Real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy's Sports Ticket, 1430 AM. Thanks for tuning in, no matter how you're tuning in, whether that's live on the radio, 1430 AM. Maybe you're watching on YouTube, Indy's Sports Ticket. Maybe you're listening via the streaming app, which you can download wherever you download your apps. Just search for Indy Sports Ticket, and it should pop up. Now, I believe that there are some basic truths in life, and one of my big things is you get what you pay for. Okay, like this is something that's been pretty evident in my life, and I'd be willing to bet that you've experienced something similar in your lifetime as well. And as I was thinking about this concept, I was reminded of the different cars that I've bought throughout my life. I'll never forget my senior year. I'm working hard all summer, doing my best to save money, wanted to buy a car before I went off to college. So I'm working and I'm working, getting up at like 5 o'clock in the morning to go and mow lawns. And it was terrible. I hated that summer. But the moment I bought my first car, it felt amazing. Felt so incredibly cool. Okay, my first car was crap. Okay, and it didn't last very long because I paid a whopping $1,800 for it. It was a white 1999 Toyota RAV4. That thing was older than I was when I bought it. Okay, it was terrible. I drove it to college. It lasted like 2 years. Didn't pick up any chicks in it because, once again, it was a white 1999 Toyota RAV4. It's basically a white box on wheels. Okay, rough. It lasted me like 2 years. Okay, you know, I drive it back home and it like wouldn't start. When it did start, it sounded weird. So I sold it for basically parts. Okay, sold it for, like $1,800. Okay, somehow, miraculously. And then I took that money plus some other money that I had made, and I went out and I bought my second car. It was a truck, 2004 black Nissan Frontier. Loved that thing. Okay, spent a little less than $5,000 for it, and it lasted a good bit of time. Okay, I had it for about 4 years. Okay, helped me pick up my beautiful wife, who I'm now married to. Okay, I feel like if I wasn't driving that truck, she probably wouldn't have liked me, but I was, and it was fantastic. Had a little gated thing on the front. It looked sick. Loved that truck, and then I totaled it in March. Okay, guy drove through a red light, hit me. Not great. And so I total it in March. Then, about 5 months ago, my wife go out and we bought a 2014 Acura RDX. And let's just say we spent a little more than $5,000 on it. And what I've noticed is that the more money that I've put into the cars that I've bought, the longer that they last. Okay, and when you pay for something nice and you pay for something expensive or something that's important, especially big things, they tend to last a little bit longer. So not my goal in life, but I think a principle that I live by is that when I'm spending money on things that matter, housing, cars, electronics, whatever it is, I like to spend a little bit more because I want to buy something that lasts. And when I look at sports, and I look at the way that organizations spend their money, I believe that the same thing is true. You get what you pay for. The Steelers don't have a quarterback this year. They're bouncing back and forth between Justin Fields and Russell Wilson because they haven't put any money. They haven't invested anything of any significance into the position. The Steelers gave up a 2026 conditional pick for Justin Fields. They didn't put anything into the position. They're paying Russell Wilson $1.2 million this year while the Denver Broncos are picking up the rest of the tab. They haven't put anything into the position. And Steeler fans are going to look up in week 10 and be like, why can't we score any points? I can tell you, it's because the Steelers organization didn't invest in the position. And they're going to sit back and they'll be like, we get all these stops and we can't score. And then you look at how the Steelers have spent their money. The majority of their money is on the defensive side of the ball. So, of course, they're going to get stops. That's the side of the ball that they have invested in. When you look at the Colts, or when I look at the Colts, it's the exact same thing. This exact same principle applies. Okay? The Colts have a terrible secondary this year. And it's not a surprise because they haven't invested in it at all. They haven't put any money into it. Kenny Moore is the highest paid defensive back on this Colts roster. His base salary this year, he's going to make a little over $4 million. Like, yeah, that's a lot of money. But by NFL standards, that is not a lot of money. The second highest paid defensive back for the Colts is Julian Blackmon, whose base salary this year is set at a little over $1 million. Once again, it's a lot of money for someone like me. But for these NFL guys, that's not a lot of money for these NFL dudes. There are two cornerbacks on this Colts roster, Jalen Jones and Dallas Flowers. They are both set to make less than $1 million this year. And they're going to get playing time. One of them is going to start. Of course, the Colts secondary is terrible. They haven't invested anything into it. They haven't invested any draft picks. They haven't invested any money. Like, of course, this secondary is going to be bad. And then I look at the rest of the NFL, and I look at specifically the Cleveland Browns, a team that's going to have one of, if not the best, secondary in the NFL this year. Their best cornerback, Denzel Ward, is the third highest paid player on their roster. Their second best cornerback is the 14th highest paid player on their roster. Of course, their secondary is going to be good. They've actually invested money into it. Okay, and then we look at the Colts roster. You know what position is going to be really good for them? The defensive line, because they've invested draft capital and money into that unit. Okay, and at the end of the year, we're going to look up, we're going to look at this Colts defense, and we're going to be like, geez, man, they just can't stop anybody from throwing the ball. Teams are just throwing the ball all over the field, and people are going to be like, Gus Bradley, why aren't you doing a better job? I'm here to tell you right now, the Colts secondary being bad this year will not be Gus Bradley's fault. At the end of the year, it's on Chris Ballard. Okay? At the end of the year, Chris Ballard's going to look up and wonder why his secondary was awful. And it won't be because of Gus Bradley. It'll be because Chris Ballard and the rest of this front office didn't invest in it. Okay, if you want something to be good, you have to invest in it. Okay, whether that's money or draft picks. Even in our daily lives, like if you want to be good at shooting basketball, you have to invest time into that thing to be good at it. Okay, Chris Ballard simply hasn't made this a priority, even though it clearly should have been when you looked at the roster at the end of last year. Okay, he hasn't, I've talked about the money side of things and how they haven't, signed any free agents. They aren't paying anyone anything big, and they haven't drafted anyone to address this need either. Okay, Kenny Moore was undrafted. Juju Brents was a second-round pick. He's the highest drafted player in this Colts secondary. Nick Cross was a third-round pick. Julian Blackmon was a third-round pick. Dallas Flowers, a guy who might start at corner this year, was undrafted. Jalen Jones was a seventh-round pick. Like, come on now. Ballard clearly hasn't invested money or draft picks into this group. And that's why it's going to be terrible. And we're going to look up in week, 10, 11, 12, whatever. We may look up in week 4 and be like, geez, Gus Bradley, you stink. Like, why can't this defense get stops? And I'm telling you, it's not on Gus Bradley. It's on Chris Ballard. Okay, we talk about coaching and the importance of it, and coaching is very important. But at the end of the day, if you don't have the guys, it's hard to do anything. And the Colts secondary, they clearly don't have the dudes. They don't have the talent. They don't have the players to be successful. And that is not Gus Bradley's fault. That is Chris Ballard's fault. He hasn't prioritized this secondary at all. He hasn't invested any money into it. He hasn't invested any draft picks into it. And that is an issue. It really, really is. And we're going to look up at the end of the year and we're going to blame all this on Gus Bradley. And I'm just here to tell you, it's not Gus Bradley's fault. This secondary being awful, that responsibility falls squarely on the shoulders of Chris Ballard. He hasn't prioritized it. He knew all off season that this secondary was hands down going to be the weak point of this team. And he didn't do anything to help it. With the 15th overall pick, he drafted Leatu Latu. He didn't have to draft Latu. He could have drafted the best corner available because every corner was still on the board. Okay, but instead, he decided to continue to hammer home the importance of the defensive line. And while I generally agree with that philosophy, that games are won in the trenches and that you need, to have good defensive linemen in order to win games. While I, agree with that for the most part, I think this is one of the issues with Ballard is he's overly invested in that philosophy. Okay, at some point, you have to be able to step back and be like, hey, I know that we want, to have a good defensive line and that we want to win in the trenches. Because once again, that's important. That's where teams win games. Okay, the NFL is all about quarterback play. Okay, so if you can keep your quarterback upright and allow him to play well, and you can rough up the other team's quarterback, you're going to win a lot of games. But part of that comes from having a good secondary. Okay, if guys are getting open in 2 seconds or less, doesn't matter how great your defensive line is, you aren't going to generate any pressure whatsoever. Okay? At some point, Chris Ballard has to realize that you have to invest and put money in and spend draft picks on positions, other than the defensive line. Once again, at the end of the year, when we look up and this Colts defense is ranked amongst the worst in the NFL, Gus Bradley's going to receive a lot of the blame, and he shouldn't. This falls squarely on the shoulders of Chris Ballard. But here's what's going to happen. This Colts defense is going to be bad. Okay? I think we all know that. And at the end of the year, Gus Bradley will be fired. That he will be the scapegoat this year. Okay? Even though it's not Gus Bradley's fault that his best defensive back is a 7th round pick out of Texas A&M. And Jalen Jones. Okay? This isn't on Gus Bradley. This is squarely on Chris Ballard. And I've got Zach Hicks set to join me at 11 o'clock today. We're going to talk about that because we have to talk about the secondary because that is hands down the most, what's a good word, concerning part of this Colts team. So we're going to continue to talk about them. I've got Top 10 Tuesday coming up. At some point today, I'm going to talk about the Tua and Brian Flores controversy. I've got a gambling thing that I want to get into here really quickly. Because, we're getting ready for the start of the season. We're really not that far away. College football starting up this Saturday. Can't wait for that. Early in the NFL season, I would advise everyone to bet the overs on games. Okay, this new kickoff rule, I think, is going to change scoring in the NFL. Not in terms of there's going to be more kickoffs returned for touchdowns, but in terms of teams used to basically start every drive at the 25-yard line. Okay, because that's what happened, right? Everyone would line up for the kickoff. I would run to the restroom. I'd come back, see the ball sail out of the back of the end zone. And then from there, the drive started at the 25-yard line. That will no longer be the case because of where they have to kick the ball. So you're going to see teams start at the 30 or the 35. Okay, and with that slight uptick in better field position, so instead of having to drive 75 yards, now you're driving 65 or 70 yards, which, it's not a major difference, but there is a difference there. And I believe that will lead to an uptick in points. So early in the season, when the regular season starts, I would bet the overs early on. I think it'll take Vegas a couple weeks to kind of adjust to the new field position and kind of how that impacts scoring. And so, it'll take them a couple weeks. So while they're adjusting to it, hit those overs and make yourself a little bit of money. When we come back here in 4 minutes, Top 10 Tuesday, getting into that, the Top 10 Tuesday topic for today is the worst situations or worst things to have as an organization. I've got that list for you when we come back here in 4 minutes.
Welcome back to The Real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy Sports Ticket, 1430 AM and 99.5 HD2.
The Real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy's Sports Ticket. Thanks for tuning in, no matter how you're tuning in, whether that's on the Twitter stream, the YouTube stream, the Indy Sports Ticket app, 14:30 a.m. in your car. However you're listening, I greatly appreciate it. Top of the hour, 11 o'clock sharp. I'll be joined by Zach Hicks of Locked On Colts to talk Colts football, what happened in preseason game 2, what do we hope to see in the third and final preseason game coming up on Thursday night. I believe that game starts at 8 o'clock. Starters are projected to play based off of what Chris Ballard said earlier last week. So plenty of things to look forward to there for that game. Now moving into Top 10 Tuesday, one of my just favorite segments. These are the worst situations or worst things to have as an organization, and I've listed them in order. Number 10, leaks. I think teams that have leaks, where they're leaking things to Adam Schefter or whoever, I think that usually points to some sort of dysfunction, someone not being fully bought into everything that's going on. And also, if you have things to leak, that's usually not a good sign either. Usually when things are fine and dandy, there's nothing in and of itself to leak. So when it comes to worst things organizations can have or situations for them to be in, having someone that's leaking things to the press or the media usually isn't a good thing. Number 9 on this Top 10 Tuesday, worst situations or things to have as an organization. Number 9, good fans, which doesn't make a ton of sense at first. Okay, you hear that and you're like, why wouldn't an organization want good fans? Don't they want people to show up to games and all those things? And the answer is yes. That's really, I think, all that organizations care about. They want to fill the seats and they want to maximize their profit. That's really what they want. But when you have good fans, you're always going to do that. You're always going to fill the stadium. Like, no matter how good or bad the Bears are, Soldier Field seems to always be filled up. No matter how good or bad the Jets are, MetLife Stadium seems to always be filled up. And for the organization, that's a great thing. But for the teams themselves, in terms of getting better and improving, it doesn't do much for them. You know who's always good? You know which teams are always making a push to be relevant? The teams in Los Angeles. You ever wonder why that is? The answer is because if you go to LA, there are 1,000,001 things to do. Okay, if the Rams aren't good, then no one's going to go to that super awesome SoFi Stadium. Okay, if the Dodgers are bad, if the Dodgers didn't have Mookie Betts and Shohei Ohtani and Freddie Freeman and Clayton Kershaw and Tyler Glasnow and all those dudes, guess what? No one in LA would go to Dodger games, which would hurt their bottom line. It's the same thing with the Lakers. Okay, teams with good fans can get complacent. Okay, it doesn't matter what the Jets or the Bears do. Like, they're going to fill their stadiums up. So why would the owner or the general manager or anyone, why would they rush to rebuild the team? All right, as long as they're putting butts in seats, I don't think they really care about what happens. So good fans, while that can be a good thing, it can also hinder a rebuild. Number 8 on the worst situations or worst things that an organization can have. Number 8 is just relentless, nonstop drama. Okay, when I say this, my mind immediately goes to Aaron Rodgers. Who in the world would ever want a guy like Aaron Rodgers on their team? He's nothing but drama. Okay, he brings nothing in terms of, media coverage that's positive. It's always about him and what crazy, absurd thing he said. Okay, we've seen this in the NBA. Plenty of teams out there, every team but like 2, didn't want to sign Kyrie Irving before he ended up being traded to the Mavericks. And the reason why is because he's just nothing, or was up until he ended up in Dallas. He was nothing but relentless, nonstop drama, saying these different absurd things that simply weren't basketball related. And it became a distraction, and his team suffered because of it. Teams, locker rooms don't need relentless, nonstop drama. Number 7 on my top 10 Tuesday list of the worst situations or things to have as an organization. Number 7 is just loud players in general, dudes that just don't know how to do anything but talk. Okay, loud and noisy locker rooms just never really seem to win. Just look at the Colts. Okay, all they do is talk and they pedal, in nothing but mediocrity. Loud players tend to lose a lot of games, and they keep talking for some reason. I don't understand it. You lose games and you keep running your mouth. Doesn't make any sense whatsoever to me. Number 6, bad quarterback contract. Now, you can pivot off of this. That's why it's not higher on the list. Like for example, the Broncos forked out a ton of money to Russell Wilson, right? He was going to be their guy, to kind of end his career. He shows up, isn't very good his first year. Second year, playing under Sean Payton as opposed to Nathaniel Hackett, he was better, but that contract looked terrible. It looked awful. But once again, you can pivot off of it pretty quickly. Like if Bo Nix is good, then everything will be forgotten very quickly. The Russell Wilson contract won't matter anymore. But if Nix isn't good, it looks like he's going to be. But if Bo Nix isn't good, then this Wilson contract is going to hang over this Broncos team for a long, long time, right? Because when your money's tied up in a guy playing for another team, it's not great, right? That limits your spending. You don't get to put as much money into the guys that are actually on your roster, and that stinks. So number 6 on the list of the worst situations to be in organizationally is having a bad quarterback contract. Number 5, bad front office philosophies. Okay. I think that whenever you're building a team and you're drafting players and you're trading for players, the philosophy behind what you're doing has to be correct. Okay. I think Ballard, from a philosophy standpoint, is correct in terms of the idea that games are won in the trenches. But I think he gets a little too committed to that sometimes. And, he overinvests in the offensive and defensive line, and positions like the secondary are kind of hung out to dry because of that. Also disagree with his philosophy of not going out and acquiring free agents. Okay, like you can get good players through free agency. That is very much a thing, and that is a philosophy thing, right? But I do think that Chris Ballard's philosophy is a little bit better than what the Lions used to do in the early 2000s. Do you remember the 5-year span from like 2002 to 2006 where the Lions took a receiver with a top 10 pick like 4 out of 5 years, right? And, that was during a time where receivers weren't really all that important. Like they were, but they aren't like, they weren't as important as they are now. That was a bad philosophy, right? So you can have a good general manager who wants to do the right things and drafts well and does all those things, but it doesn't matter if they don't draft the right position, if they don't acquire the right position in free agency, or if they neglect different areas of the roster like Chris Ballard has done with this secondary. Number 4, bad head coach. Number 4 on my top 10 Tuesday list of the worst situations to be in or organizationally is a bad head coach. Okay, like this is something that's preached every single draft cycle, whether it's NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, the National Hockey League, whatever league you want to talk about. We preach, or people in general, preach that oftentimes the success of a player isn't based off of that player. It's very oftentimes based upon who drafts them, what situation are they going into, right? And a large part of that is who is your coach? Is the coach good enough to put players in the correct positions to succeed? That's why I really liked the idea of betting J.J. McCarthy to win Rookie of the Year, because he was going to play for a guy in Kevin O'Connell who is a good, young, bright offensive mind who was going to put J.J. McCarthy in positions to be successful. Now that J.J. McCarthy's out for the year, this same philosophy just shifts to Bo Nix. If you're going to bet anyone for Rookie of the Year that's not Caleb Williams, I would bet Bo Nix. So why is that? Because he's playing for Sean Payton. Okay, and you and I both know that Sean Payton is going to put Bo Nix in places where he can succeed because he's a good head coach, right? Bad head coaches do the exact opposite. Okay, they ruin players. I would argue that Brian Flores was a bad head coach in Miami. Okay. And I say that because he consistently did not put Tua in positions to succeed as a young quarterback. And I've got that audio. I'm going to talk about it a little bit today because I think that what people are saying about Tua and young athletes in general now, I think it's just flat out wrong. So I'm going to talk about that probably coming up here in 10 minutes or so. But anyway, back to this list. Number 4 on the top 10 Tuesday worst situations to be in or organizationally is hiring a bad head coach. The thing about hiring a bad head coach, though, is you can pivot off of it pretty quickly. Okay, like Joe Judge didn't last a year in New York before they fired him and they went and hired someone else. Okay, Josh McDaniels didn't last very long in, Las Vegas coaching the Raiders. They were able to fire him and pivot off of him pretty quickly, right? So that's why I've got it a little bit lower on the list. Number 3, bad general manager for the worst situations to be in organizationally. Look, you got to have good players to win. Okay, I'm not, reinventing the wheel here with that one. And if the guy in charge of acquiring good players can't do it, then you're going to lose a lot of games. It's really that simple. And when we look at Chris Ballard, I don't think that he's necessarily bad at drafting, right? There are definitely good players that he's picked up throughout his time in Indianapolis and during his time in Kansas City. I just think that his philosophy on how he drafts and his reluctancy to go get guys in free agency, I think that that is more of his issue rather than his drafting ability. Number 2, bad quarterback. Okay. You definitely could have argued for this to be number 1. Okay. This is, number 2 on the 10 worst situations to be in as an organization. Number 2 is bad quarterback. Everything can be perfect in an organization. You can have the best general manager. You can have the best head coach. You can have the best receivers. You can have the best offensive line. You can have the best defense. You can have the best everything. But if your quarterback is average, or if your quarterback isn't as good as the guy playing quarterback for the other team, then it doesn't really matter. If you don't believe me, let's just look at the Chiefs and the Ravens last year. The Ravens were better than the Chiefs, I think, at every position pretty much across the board last year. Like, the Ravens had arguably the best defense in the NFL last year. And the Ravens had definitely a better receiving core than the Chiefs did. And they had a better offensive line than the Chiefs did. And they had a better defensive line than the Chiefs did. And their secondary was better than the Chiefs. They were better than the Chiefs everywhere. And that's why they were the number 1 seed in the AFC last year, because they were just awesome. They were loaded. Good general manager, good head coach, good quarterback even. But guess what? Lamar Jackson, not as good as Patrick Mahomes. And it didn't matter that they were better everywhere else. Okay? You have to have an awesome quarterback if you're going to win in the NFL. And a great quarterback can mask everything. If you have a bad general manager, if you have Mahomes, it doesn't really matter. He's going to make up for the deficiencies on your team. If you have a bad head coach, it doesn't really matter if you have Patrick Mahomes or Tom Brady, because they're going to make up for the deficiencies on your team. If you have a bad owner, if you have a great quarterback, it doesn't matter. They're going to make up for the deficiencies. Speaking of bad owners, that is number 1 on the list of the worst situations to be in or organizationally. Now, bad owners, I think, lean one of 2 ways. You have an owner that doesn't care. Okay, they don't invest money into the team or things like that. So you have guys that don't care and don't want to spend the money to be great, or you have owners that care way too much to a point where they get in the way of success. Think Jerry Jones with the Dallas Cowboys. Okay, like, those are kind of the 2 different sides of the spectrum. You have guys that don't care, aren't around the building, don't put money into it, and that is an issue because, look, it all starts at the top. If you have an owner that doesn't care, then best of luck to you. You probably aren't going to win very many games. But if you have an owner that is invested and does really care, but it's to a point where it's like Jerry Jones, where he wants to make every decision himself, then you are in trouble. You're in big, big trouble. So that is my top 10 Tuesday list of the worst situations to be in or organizationally. One more time to run through the list. Starting at number 10 is leaks from, the inside. good fans, 8 relentless nonstop drama, 7 loud players, 6 a bad quarterback contract, 5 bad philosophies from your front office, 4 a bad head coach, 3 a bad GM, 2 a bad quarterback, and number 1 a bad owner, because it all starts at the top. And organizations do different things to try and bounce back from these things, right? They draft new quarterbacks every year. They hire new head coaches, right? They do all these different things to try and fix, whatever bad thing is hindering their performance as an organization. We saw the Dolphins do this by drafting Tua and firing Brian Flores and bringing in a new head coach. I'm going to talk about that when we come back here in 4 minutes. I've also got some thoughts on the Commanders. I think they're going to be one of the most improved teams in the NFL this year. I'm going to get to that as well when we come back here in 4 minutes.
The best takes, stories, and entertainment. It's The Real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy Sports Ticket, 1430 AM and 99.5 HD2.
The Real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy's Sports Ticket. Hope you guys are having a nice Tuesday. Yesterday flew by. Don't know why, but it did. Coming up, top of the hour, 20 minutes away, Zach Hicks of Locked On Colts also writes about the Colts. Follow him on Twitter at Zach Hicks2. He's joining me. We're talking, obviously, the Colts, preseason game 2, what we liked, what we didn't like, what we hope to see in the third preseason game, which happens Thursday night as the Colts go on the road to take on the Cincinnati Bengals and Joe Burrow. We're going to see how terrible that secondary looks coming up on Thursday night, 2 nights away from it. Cannot wait for that. And while we've waited for that, while we wait for the NFL season to start, we have to have things to talk about. So Dan Lebatard, not too sure how you say it. You know, he does his show down in Miami, and he had Tua on, and he did this interview with Tua, and he asked him about the difference between playing for Brian Flores and Mike McDaniel. And let's just say that it's picked up some traction on the internet, and people are weighing in. If you haven't heard it, here is Tua Tagovailoa, Dolphins quarterback, talking about the difference between playing for Brian Flores and Mike McDaniel.
Well, to put it in simplest terms, if you woke up every morning and I told you you suck at what you did, that you don't belong doing what you do, that you shouldn't be here, that this guy should be here, that you haven't earned this right, and then you have somebody else come in and tell you, dude, you are the best fit for this. Like, you are accurate, you are the best whatever, you are this, you are that. Like, how would it make you feel listening to one or the other? You see what I'm saying? And then you hear it, regardless of what it is, the good or the bad. And you hear it more and more. You start to actually believe that. I don't care who you are. You could be the president of the United States. You have a terrible person that's telling you things that you don't want to hear, or that you probably shouldn't be hearing. You're going to start to believe that about yourself. And so that's sort of like what ended up happening. And it was, I mean, it's basically been 2 years of training that out of not just me, but a couple of the guys as well that have been here since my rookie year all the way till now.
That was Dolphins starting quarterback Tua Tagovailoa talking about, the way that he was coached by Brian Flores versus the way that he's been coached by Mike McDaniel. And I've seen it on Twitter, and people are driving me crazy, labeling Tua as soft, and then they put it on kind of everyone in this generation of like, oh, this generation's so soft. They can't take hard coaching, blah, 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 blah. That's the new thing to say, man. This young generation, they're just soft, which I don't know if that's entirely true. I like to think that I'm not very soft, but hey, man, who knows? And here's my thing with Tua, though. If your takeaway from that is Tua doesn't know how to take hard coaching, I would immediately push back on you and say that Tua played for Nick Saban. That dude coached his players harder than anyone. Okay, like there are so many viral fun videos to watch, honestly, of Nick Saban just chewing dudes out. Okay, Tua played for Nick freaking Saban, who is no stranger to getting in his players and yelling at them. I can promise you that. Okay? So, this isn't a Tua's soft thing. This is a Brian Flores doesn't understand that every player is different thing. Like there's some players that you have to tell them that they suck every day, and then there are other players that you can't do that to. Every player is different. And I do think that there's a significant amount of truth in what Tua is saying. And I do think that this implies to everyone, positive reinforcement helps people. Okay, I'm a big believer that confidence is one of the most important things that an athlete can have. Okay, positive reinforcement helps that. And it's clearly helped Tua. He's played at a much higher level under McDaniels than he did Brian Flores. No one can deny that. And I know he's throwing to Tyreek Hill now, which helps, but Tua led the NFL in passing yards last year. That never would have happened under Brian Flores. Okay, he was top 5 in completion percentage. That never would have happened under Brian Flores. He was 5th in passing touchdowns last year, tied for 5th with Josh Allen. That never would have happened under Brian Flores. This positive reinforcement, this idea of encouragement, like I understand that football is a hard-nosed, tough, physical sport, but positive reinforcement is not a bad thing. Encouraging your players, encouraging your teammates isn't a bad thing. I think that this just comes back to human nature. Okay, if you had a boss at your job who told you all the time how much you sucked and how terrible you were and how you shouldn't have a job and how you haven't earned the right to do whatever, then I don't know. I would probably guess that you would, one, look to quit, and two, you wouldn't like your boss, right? And you wouldn't look forward to going into work every day. Okay, like that would be my bet. I know, like if my boss was that way, I'd be looking to get up out of here. Seriously, I would. Okay, people just perform better when they have confidence. People perform better when they get positive reinforcement, when they do something well and their superiors look down and say, hey, man, you did a good job on this. That helps people perform. And I don't think that, I think that applies to professional athletes as well. And let's be honest, when it comes to dealing with hate and being told that they suck, like athletes do have to deal with the internet. Okay, like they get plenty of, hey man, you suck when they get on their Twitter. I promise you, they don't need more of that from their coaches. So I don't think that what Tua said reveals that he's soft. I don't think that it reveals anything like that. I think it just reveals that Brian Flores didn't know how to coach Tua. And when we look at his production from when he was playing for Flores and since he's left, I think it's pretty obvious that Brian Flores just didn't know how to coach Tua. Moving on, I want to talk about something else here for a moment. I think that the Commanders are going to be amongst one of the most improved teams this year in the NFL. My favorite bet in terms of over-under win totals this year in the NFL, my favorite one is Broncos over 5.5 wins. Bo Nix looks good. Sean Payton is a good head coach. The defense should be better because their defense was horrendously bad last year. So that is my favorite bet. Broncos over 5.5 wins. My second favorite is the Commanders over 6.5 wins. The Commanders went 4-13 last year. They had the number 2 overall pick, and they drafted Jaden Daniels. Their over-under win total this year is set at 6.5 wins. I think that this Commanders team is a 7 or 8 win team. So I like the over 6.5 wins. Okay, I think this is a great number for you and for me to bet. Okay, they got better at a couple of important positions. I think Jaden Daniels is going to be better than Sam Howell. Okay, that's not some galaxy brain take. I think a lot of people that watched Sam Howell play quarterback last year would agree with that. Okay, Jaden Daniels throws the ball really well. His speed alone is going to be a lot for defenses to have to try to defend. So you pair that with his ability to throw the football really well. The limited action we've seen from him in the preseason has looked really good. So Jaden Daniels, like they have an upgrade at quarterback. Number 2, Dan Quinn is their head coach now. Okay, no matter how you feel about Dan Quinn, he did coach the Falcons to a Super Bowl. Did they blow it? Yes, but they still won the NFC. And he's going to have the defense playing well. When he was in Dallas, like that Dallas Cowboys defense performed really well while he was there. Okay, so they have an upgraded head coach because Ron Rivera was awful when he was coaching for the Commanders. So they've upgraded a quarterback and they've upgraded a head coach. That's a major green flag in terms of them being better and winning more than 4 games like they did last year. The biggest thing, though, and the biggest reason as to why I like this idea of betting the Commanders over 6.5 wins is turnover differential. Turnovers are primarily a luck stat, right? It's who you play against and do they make mistakes. Okay, like that's how turnovers are created. It's very rarely, I think, based off of something that the defense does. Most of the time, it's the quarterback just made a dumb decision, or when your left defensive end went in to tackle somebody, they accidentally knocked the ball out. Okay, I think that turnovers are rarely a skill-based thing. They are oftentimes a luck stat. So when you look at turnover margin, it's a very easy way to see who are the luckiest and unluckiest teams in the NFL. The Commanders were last in turnover differential last year. That will not happen again because, once again, turnovers are a luck stat. Okay, so the turnover margin should kind of lean more in their favor. They're better at quarterback, and Dan Quinn's a better head coach than Ron Rivera. Okay, and when we look at the history of the NFL, teams that ranked last in turnover differential seeing massive improvement the following year. Okay, when we go back to 2022, the Colts were last in turnover margin, and they went 4-12. Or 4-12-1, excuse me. And then last year, they were +2 in turnover margin, so they were much improved, and they went 9-8. That's a 5-win difference with a backup quarterback, a rookie head coach, and very little Jonathan Taylor. Okay, the turnover margin improved because, once again, it's just a luck stat. And because of that, the Colts won double the amount of games that they had the previous year. And this isn't the only time that we've seen that. In 2021, the Jacksonville Jaguars, they were last in turnover margin at -20. The following year, they were +5, right? That's a 25 turnover differential. Okay, and in 2021, they went 3-14. 2022, they went 9-8. They tripled their win total. Go back to 2020, the Broncos were last in turnover margin. Okay, and they went 5-11. The next year, they weren't last in turnover margin, and they went 7-10. They improved by 2 wins. Okay, in 2019, the Chargers and the Giants both tied for last in turnover margin. Okay, the Chargers went 5-11. The Giants went 4-12. The following year, the Chargers went 7-9, an improvement by 2 wins. The Giants went 6-10, an improvement by 2 wins. We look at the 49ers in 2018. Last example, I promise. 49ers, 2018. They were last in turnover margin at -25. They went 4-12 that year. The next year, in terms of turnover margin, they were a +4, and they went 13-3. Okay, we see significant improvement from teams that are last in turnover margin heading into the next season. And when we look at 2023, the Washington Commanders were last in turnover margin at -13. They are going to see improvement this year just simply because the turnover margin for them will not be that lopsided again. The history of the NFL points to that. Okay, like I've got, data on this going all the way back to 2011 supporting this idea that I have. And so I sit back and I look at that 6.5 wins because that's the over-under. And I'm like, can they be three wins better? And I think that the answer is a resounding yes, because they're going to be better at quarterback. They have a better head coach, and the turnover luck isn't going to skew that badly for them again, because it doesn't skew that badly for anybody 2 years in a row. Okay, turnover margin, turnover luck. It's incredible how big of an impact that has on your season. And it makes sense because when you turn the ball over, you're usually, either giving up an opportunity to score, like if you turn it over in the red zone, or you're giving up good field position for the other team to score, right? Which obviously leads to them scoring more points, which in turn makes it a little bit tougher to win football games. So Commanders over 6.5. Don't like that number as much as I like Broncos over 5.5. Once again, that's still my favorite over-under bet for the season. But the Commanders over 6.5 wins, I really like. I would get on that. If the Sack Man is listening to this, don't fade it, because I'm telling you, it's going to happen. Commanders over 6.5 wins this season. Lock it in. Coming up in about 5 minutes, Zach Hicks every Tuesday, 11 o'clock. He's awesome, smart guy, watches film, goes back. He's great. Love having him on the show. He's going to join me. We're talking Colts' second preseason game, what we like, what we didn't like. Nick Cross, Julian Blackman, are they going to be the starting safeties? We're going to talk about, Jim Irsay's comments on Ballard and Steichen, and we're going to look ahead to Thursday for the third preseason game. All that's coming your way in 5 minutes here on The Real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy's Sports Ticket.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for...
It's the Real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy Sports Ticket, 1430 AM and 99.5 HD2.
What's going on? It's the Real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy's Sports Ticket. Just a great show. That first hour was awesome, talking about how you get what you pay for and a little Top 10 Tuesday, and the show just keeps rolling. Joining me now, Zach Hicks of Locked On Colts. He writes about the Colts as well. You can see all of his stuff on his Twitter at Zach Hicks2. Zach, what's going on, man?
Oh, nothing much, man. Just, watching preseason film right now as we're talking. So it's that time of year, man. It's that time of year.
How is that? Because I see you post stuff, and I sit there and I'm like, there's a part of me that's like, I'd love to have his job, man. Just like hang out, watch some film. Like, it sounds great, but then I'm like, it's not like he's watching Anthony Richardson film. He's watching like this third string defensive tackle from a school I've never heard of. Like, is that really enjoyable?
I think you have to kind of enjoy the aspects of it and stuff. I think for me, being such draft nerd and stuff, and just loving the minor players getting the chances to play and stuff, and knowing these are dudes like, hey, I watched these guys for like 3 or 4 years in college, and this might be the last chance I ever get to watch any of these guys. I think that is pretty enjoyable, but if you try to break down like any kind of scheme in the preseason, it really doesn't really mean anything. It just doesn't. It doesn't really relate to the regular season, and honestly, people don't really care too much unless it's Anthony Richardson. So, but it's all in the fun, man. Look, I have a lot of fun talking about Jason Bean, and I think everyone else should too. It's a blast.
Dude, Jason Bean's awesome. He was so much fun to watch against the Cardinals. I was pleasantly surprised. I thought, Ellinger, Bean, and Salvis all looked decently good. It's to a point where I'm like if Joe Flacco and Anthony Richardson both go down, am I going to be excited about seeing one of those three guys go out there? No, but I know it's not going to be like Zach Wilson for the Jets last year. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it'll be fun at least. Look, I was a big Jason Bean fan in college, so I know how Jason Bean is, where what's the best NFL equivalent? I can't really, it's like a Taylor Heineke type thing where it's look, this guy can play a little bit, but he's going to make a couple of decisions a game where it's like, what are you doing? What are you doing? But at the end of the day, especially when it comes to preseason, for me, as long as these guys are fun players to watch and enjoyable, I mean, I think Slovis and Bean are probably two of the more enjoyable off-season quarterback arms they've had in here. I know they had that Notre Dame kid last year. I can't remember his name that was in camp, but getting guys like Bean and Slovis in here, I think they've been much more enjoyable to watch in the second halves of these preseason games than most Colts bottom of the roster guys. And that's without talking about Sam Ehlinger, because Ehlinger is really fun to watch in the preseason. But these other guys, I think they've been really good, and I hope they get a chance. I know they were both drafted really high in the UFL just a couple weeks ago. So if they can't make it on a practice squad for whatever reason, they have that lined up for them. So it's not the last we're going to hear of Jason Bean and Keaton Slovis in terms of football. So that's always really good to see for these young guys.
It really is, and the USFL, they've kind of created this thing where you can go from that to playing in the actual NFL. So hopefully, things work out for them. But besides the quarterbacks, what really kind of jumped out to you from these Colts second and third stringers from Saturday's game?
I think the one guy who's really stood out, and I think when you're looking at the preseason stuff, you have to look at the players who are going to have some kind of role this year on the team. So it's one thing if I'm going to sit here and say like a Jason Bean, for instance, or whatever, it's look, even if he does somehow make it to the practice squad, he's not going to be much for the Colts this year. But when you're looking at a player like Adetomiwa Adebawore, the pass rusher for the Colts, who was a 4th-round pick last year, ran a 4.49 in the 40-yard dash at 280 pounds, one of the craziest athletes we've ever seen at the combine. And he had some flashes last year, but it just wasn't really where you wanted to see it. So, he needed that development, needed that time. And then you're looking at him this preseason, and I know it's against backup offensive linemen for the most part, but this is what you want to see in year 2. I mean, he's got 7 total pressures so far this preseason, 4 quarterback hits, leads all of football with quarterback hits in the preseason, got a sack in the game the other day. he's really taken a step forward. Only 45 pass rushes and 7 pressures is fantastic to see from him. The run defense is still coming along, but when you're looking at a team that already has a pretty good pass rush group and guys who can come off the bench and play a little bit, and you're factoring in a second-year jump from Adetomiwa, like, this could be a really, really good defensive line if he's really making this jump. But I've been really impressed by him, man. He's got the athleticism, he's got the effort, he's got the hustle like he had last year. But this year he's showing the ability to deconstruct blocks, get off blocks, and create pressure by hitting quarterbacks. Like, if he can carry this into the regular season, man, like, if you're getting a guy with like 100 pass rush snaps next year who's productive like this or showing what he's shown so far, your defensive line is going to be really good. So I've been really impressed by him, and it's always great to see players take that second-year jump because he looks like a guy who really worked on his flaws in the offseason, came into camp just ready to go, and he's figuring it out, man. And that's always the biggest thing for pass rushers, just figuring it out. So really, really excited from what I've seen from him so far this preseason.
It really is. Joined by Zach Hicks of Locked On Colts. You know, I thought there were 2 guys to me on Saturday that really kind of leaped out. I thought Isaiah Land, when he played, I thought he was really good, kind of playing that outside linebacker, edge rusher kind of spot. He had a sack, had a couple of tackles for loss as well. I thought he looked really good. And I kind of like Nick Cross at strong safety. I felt like when he was on the field, like, they called his name repeatedly. I felt like he was always around the ball. And it's kind of got me thinking, because I'm thinking about the secondary like that. It keeps me up at night. It's really not good. Like, what are the chances they flip him and Julian Blackmon? Because it seems like, just based off of reps and the way that they're giving them out, it seems like it's going to be Nick Cross and Julian Blackmon at the 2 safety spots. I know they've played Blackmon at free safety some during camp. Any chance that they flip the 2? And what are kind of your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So one thing I will say, and even this goes for Gus Bradley and his somewhat archaic style of calling defenses. Modern safeties nowadays have to be able to play both, just because with quarterbacks you can't really line up in the classic defense where, okay, the same strong safeties coming to the box every time, the same free safeties over the top, because then you're giving tells to quarterbacks, and quarterbacks are just too smart, too athletic, too talented nowadays to where you can't disguise stuff pre-snap. So you have to be able to disguise stuff a little bit. So, you know, if you're starting too high, for instance, pre-snap, but you have a guy like let's say like Nick Cross is only a strong safety or Julian Blackmon's only a strong safety, you could start too high pre-snap, but if a quarterback sees that, they're like, hey, they're going to drop the guy down because he's a strong safety. He doesn't play over the top. So it's good that they're giving these guys both reps, playing over the top, playing deep, playing in the box. So that way you can disguise a little bit more come regular season. But to your point, there is going to be one of these guys who plays a little bit more in the box, does more strong safety stuff, and another guy who does more free safety stuff. And I think, you know, it's a benefit, obviously, to have a guy like Julian Blackmon who had a great season last year, obviously, at strong safety, but he's got the ball skill and the range to play free safety. And I'm kind of in the same boat with you where it's like, look, they drafted Nick Cross to be a strong safety. I know it didn't really work out too much his rookie season, but, you know, like, maybe as time has gone by, he's going to work out there at that strong safety spot. But to go to what you've been saying about the preseason, though, I think it's been a really strong showing from Cross in these 2 games. And I'm like you, I'm not going to say like I'm perfectly fine with safety now. Like, don't worry, safety's all good. I'm not there yet. Don't get me wrong. It's just 2 preseason games. But from what we've seen from him through 2 games, I'm very optimistic of what he can play. Like, I know I've been burned in the past by being optimistic about certain things, but Nick Cross has played some good football. If he can just get to, you know, having the communication down with Julian Blackmon, I think they can be really good back there this next season. So regardless of where they end up playing these guys, strong safety, free safety, there will be a lot of rotation. Maybe if the Colts do more 2 high or more like cover 4 and cover 2 type stuff, they'll both be deep a little bit more and keep things in front. But regardless, man, we have to be kind of optimistic about what Cross has shown, especially recently in the preseason, because like, it's been pretty good, man. Like, I can't complain with what he's shown out there. Hopefully, you know, with communication and just his overall play, it can carry forward into the regular season, because that would be massive for this young cornerback room.
It really would. Like, the Colts really need Nick Cross to play well. And I'm with you. Like you said, he's played really well in these first 2 preseason games. It's not quite enough to erase the memory of how he's played the last 2 years during the regular season. But, we've seen guys make a year 3 leap before, and hopefully that is what's happening for Nick Cross. We're going to find out on Thursday when they play against the Bengals. Chris Ballard alluding to the starters playing a pretty decent amount in that game. But before we talk about their game against the Bengals on Thursday night, once again joined by Zach Hicks of Locked On Colts. I'm assuming you heard what Jim Irsay said about Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen. I'm assuming you watched the game. What were kind of your thoughts on him comparing Shane Steichen to Don Shula and calling Chris Ballard a blue chip GM? What'd you kind of think of all that?
Yeah. So first off, I will say, look, I love Jim. As much as you can love an owner, I love Jim. I mean, I've told you guys on this show a couple times, I came from being a Washington fan as a kid. So literally any owner was going to be a step up from where I was as a kid. So I love Jim, but when it comes to listening to a game, I did kind of mute my game when he came on there. Just like I like announcers and stuff, and just hearing like man and God, like it just wasn't for me while I was watching the game. So I was trying to focus, but I did see those comments afterwards, and honestly, like I'm as big a Shane Steichen fan as someone can be. So obviously the Don Shula comparison's a little bit before my time. I don't even know if Shula was still coaching by the time I was born. But if he's basically just saying great offensive mind, I mean, I agree to that extent.
Yeah.
I think Shane Steichen's a fantastic offensive mind. Shane Steichen's so interesting to me too, because in a league where you have the Shanahans and the McVays and all those types of coaches who have these really diverse playbooks with so many different things thrown in there, Steichen is pretty basic in terms of what he calls, but he just knows when to call it. Like one of the best play sequencers in the sport, knows exactly how to script out a game plan, knows exactly how to set up defenses. And look, once he finds your weakness on a defense, he's just going to call the same thing 50 times in a row. He's like me on sports video games when I'm just calling RPO because I know I can exploit it a little bit. So yeah, I think, I can't say anything about the Don Shula comparison, but I love it, man. I love it. Like I love Shane Steichen hype because I really do think he's that good of a coach. In terms of Chris Ballard being a blue chip GM, I mean, look, we've known that Irsay views him that way for years. I mean, when he wasn't even somewhat on the hot seat after 2022, it became very apparent that that's how Jim Irsay viewed Chris Ballard. And while I probably wouldn't say blue chip GM, I do think he's better in some ways than some people think. I think he's worse in some ways than some people think. I think he's a fine GM. Like I really don't have too many issues with Chris Ballard. I think he's a good drafter. I think for the most part, the way that he approaches free agency is the correct way. I think he's a little too passive with it, but for the most part, I'd rather a GM be a little bit more passive with free agency than too aggressive, because typically that burns you. And I think a lot of his faults have really just been trusting his own drafts a little too much and then missing on the quarterback position. But I think if you have luck throughout all this, which I know it's a thing that we can't really talk about too much anymore, but like if you have, your quarterback in place throughout all this, I think he'd be looked at as a much better GM. But I think he's a fine GM. Like I really don't think he's a horrible one like some people think. I don't think he's a blue chipper, but I think he's pretty close. I think he's a good GM. So I don't really mind those comments by Jim Irsay. The Shula one, again, it's a little bit before my time, but I think Steichen's a great coach. I'm really excited for Shane Steichen here in Indy.
Yeah, me too. I love Steichen. I sing his praises every day. I think he's awesome. Just going back to what he was doing when he was with the Chargers. The Ballard thing, I think he's fine. Like I think there are general managers out there better than him. Like when Jim Irsay said it, I was like, if Chris Ballard's blue chipper, then like what is Brett Veach? Because that dude is just doing awesome things in Kansas City. And so, I think there are better GMs out there than Chris Ballard, but there are definitely worse ones out there as well. So yeah, he said it all, and I was like, I feel like he's just trying to generate some hype so that people buy some season tickets. But hey, I don't really know. But once again, joined by my guy Zach Hicks of Locked On Colts. So let's move into the third preseason game now. I gotta be honest, I just want to see the offense look awesome. Like I want to see Anthony Richardson in rhythm, hitting guys, on time. That's really the big thing that I want to see, because I think that, I don't know, like we talked about this defense enough to know that for the Colts to win games this year, this offense is going to have to be top 10 in the league. And I'd like for them to look like that. What are you kind of hoping to see in this third preseason game?
Yeah, again, we have to keep things in perspective, because preseason, you're not going to be doing, you're not really doing a lot of game planning for your opponent and stuff. So it's not going to be super, super crisp and super perfect. But I'm with you in terms of I want to see some juice out of this offense a little bit. I want to see how the RPO game looks. I want to see how the read option game looks in the couple times they call it, and how Taylor and Richardson look with that dynamic that we've been hyping up since before last season. How those two guys are going to impact the defense. I want to see some deep passes. Again, last year the Colts had I think I put it out there the other day. I think 54 passes over 20 yards down the field last year. That's just not good enough in a Shane Steichen offense. He's a layups and threes type of offense guy, and there was way too many layups and not enough threes last year in this offense.
Okay.
And I think having a Richardson, is going to open up the downfield shots a little bit more. So I do want to see some big play attempts, some shots down the field to a Pierce or an AD Mitchell. I want to see the running game looking good. And yeah, I'm kind of with you. I want to see some fireworks here, not in terms of I don't need 35 points by halftime or anything, but give me one or two really good drives where they go down the field, convert in the red zone, score a touchdown, and then get them out of there and get ready for the regular season. I think that's a very, worthwhile expectation to have for this final preseason game.
Yeah, and look, it's like you said, it's the last one. You've worked through all this training camp stuff. You should at least have some sort of familiarity with new receivers and things of that nature. So I'm excited for it. And as I mentioned earlier, the secondary and fixing it keeps me up at night. And I won't lie to you, when the Vikings signed Stephon Gilmore, that was at the end of last week, I was a little salty. I was like, that's a guy who's had success here in Indianapolis before. And so, I couldn't sleep last night. So I'm looking through free agents, who could the Colts potentially sign if these corners don't pan out. If the Colts signed Xavier Howard, would that make you feel any better? Because he's a guy who's just kind of sitting out there who had a pretty good career in Miami. I believe he's 31, so he's not super old, but he's definitely is a little bit older than most corners. If the Colts went and got him, how would you kind of feel about that?
I think I feel a little bit better just because it's a proven veteran, and it's the floor is probably a lot higher with him, and even the ceiling might be a little bit higher too. But I do think we're at the point now where it's if he's still out there, there might be something going on with it. Every single team is just chilling right now. But yeah, I do have some concern with this quarterback room. Obviously, I think the biggest one that people aren't talking enough about is the health of Juju Brents. He just hasn't been healthy in a long time. It's not to the Paris Campbell way where it's a major injury every time, but it seems like every time he gets on the field, there's something that happens where it's a little nick or a bruise or something that keeps him out for a day or a week or two, and it's all right, man, you got to play to do anything in this league. You got to just be on the field. And it's getting to the point now where it's if Jalen Jones is your top corner for most of the year, that's not a promising thing. Juju Brents you can live with because you spent a top 50 pick on him.
Yeah.
But Jalen Jones is a 7th rounder from last year that you feel decent about, but not cornerback one about. And then who would be the other starter? Dallas Flowers?
Undrafted?
Darrell Baker Jr.? Yeah, Darrell Baker Jr. undrafted as well. It's getting to the point where it's look, Juju needs to stay on the field. Jalen Jones needs to have a jump, and these other guys need to be solid backups. And that's not this crazy, crazy unrealistic expectation, but it's also still a higher expectation that needs to hit for the Colts. So yeah, this third preseason game, you want to see these guys have a good showing, regardless of if the Bengals starters or backups play. I'm not too sure exactly what their plan is for this game, but yeah, you want to see Juju finish the game and play healthy and play some good football. Jalen Jones, I think, has been fine in the one game he played, but again, you want to see it keep going with him, and then see Flowers and Baker whenever they go on the field, still showing some good things too. So Yeah, I'm worried about corner as well. Like Xavier Howard, I think would just raise the floor and give you like a better feeling at least for this corner room. But the Colts are a young team. I get them going young at corner, but it needs to work out. It can't. If you miss the playoffs by one game this year, like it was last year, everyone's going to be looking at that cornerback room. So you better be right when it comes to playing these young kids and them taking that step forward.
Yeah, I've been thinking just a lot about Ballard, and I was looking at the secondary, and I was like, I just don't feel like Chris Ballard has invested enough in that room. Like Kenny Moore's the highest paid guy, and he's going to make his base salary this year is a little over $4 million. The highest drafted guy in that room is Juju Brents, who was a second round pick. Outside of that, it's, seventh round pick Jalen Jones, and undrafted Dallas Flowers, and undrafted Kenny Moore. And like, I think that, throughout the year, coaches take a lot of the blame. And I think if the Colts secondary is bad, we're going to blame Gus Bradley. But for me, it's like, I feel like this is more on Ballard because he hasn't invested in the room enough. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And we've kind of seen this throughout Chris Ballard's time with the Colts, where outside of the occasional like veteran like a Stephon Gilmore or an Xavier Rhodes, he doesn't really invest too much in terms of like money in secondary. Like it's just not a priority for him. Now, when it comes to pass rush, it's all the money will go into pass rush. He will devote all the resources he can. So he's clearly of that school of thought where pass rush is more valuable than secondary player, than coverage play. But you know what? Your pass rush better be elite if you're thinking that way, because if you're looking at what they're paying on the defensive line this year, they're paying Leatu Latu a top 15 pick contract, which is not super high, but it's a decent little contract. DeForest Buckner making a massive contract. Grover Stewart just got extended. Kwity Paye got his 5th-year option picked up, which is going to be over $10 million a year. Samson Ebukam, who I know got hurt, but another guy making near $10 million a year. Tyquan Lewis got extended for $4 or $5 million a year.
Yeah.
Like these are pretty decent contracts, but your defensive line play needs to be at the level where all that money investment really pays off. And I think they can be. I mean, from what we've seen from this defensive line this offseason, what we saw from them last year, even without Latu, I think they can be that good. It's just they really need to be this good this year if you're not going to invest that much money in the secondary. I mean, outside of Kenny Moore, does Tyquan Lewis make more per year than the entire secondary combined? Even Julian Blackman, Blackman's contract was pretty low when they brought him back. So like
$3 million max. Like if he hits all of his bonuses, he'll make $3 million. That's it.
Yeah. So it's like I know it's a different school of thought philosophy than some people. Like some people will say pay your secondary and then go younger on the defensive line. Ballard's clearly pay the defensive line and draft the defensive line and go young in the secondary. But it really needs to work out. Like the defensive line needs to be dominant for that to happen, and it can happen. It's really what needs to happen for the Colts to be successful this year. So we'll see. You can't really close the book on it and say that it's 100% not going to work. But it better work. If the Colts finish one game short of the playoffs again this year, and it's because someone in the secondary got cooked on a final play or something like that, we all know where they're going to point. It's always at the big flaw that Ballard leaves they're going to point at. And right now it's still looking like it's secondary.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I went a little over on time there. Zach, thanks for your time, dude. You're great as always. I'm looking forward to Thursday. I'm looking forward to all the film videos that you're going to put out, hopefully on starters this week, because they should play a little bit more. So I can't wait for all that, man.
Awesome, man. Thanks for having me.
Yep, you got it, man. I'll see you. That is Zach Hicks. Follow him on Twitter at Zach Hicks2. You can check out all of his articles there. He also hosts the Locked On Colts podcast. You can get that wherever you get your podcast. So check out all his stuff. Smart guy, really puts in the work, which I appreciate. Wouldn't have him on the show if he didn't. When we come back in 4 minutes, you get what you pay for. I alluded to it a little bit there, in that conversation with Zach, but I'm going to go a little bit more in depth on how you have to invest in things if you want to see a return that's coming your way here in 4 minutes.
Unadulterated sports talk with unfiltered takes. It's the real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy Sports Ticket, 1430 AM and 99.5 HD2.
What's going on? The real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy's Sports Ticket. Thanks for tuning in, no matter how you're tuning in. Maybe you're watching on YouTube, Indy Sports Ticket. Head over there, subscribe, join the chat, join the conversation. Maybe you're listening via the Indy Sports Ticket app, which you can download on the App Store or the Google Play Store. Maybe you're watching on Twitter at __ Jonathan Smith if you want to follow me there. Also follow the station at Ticket 1430 for all the updates on my show and Dan Dockett's show, which is coming up here in 30 minutes. Or maybe you're just listening the old-fashioned way, in the car, on the radio, 1430 AM. Speaking of the car, I want to talk about cars here for a second. My first car, terrible. Absolute crap. Didn't last. Had it for like 2 years. Okay, I paid $1,800 for it. It was a white 1999 Toyota RAV4. The car was older than I was when I bought it. I remember working my butt off for an entire summer, mowing grass, weed eating, lining baseball fields. It was terrible. Getting up at like 5 a.m. so I could get to work on time. It was awful. One of the worst summers of my life. But when I handed that big fat wad of cash to this guy, paid $1,800 for this car, I had a ton of pride, right? Drove that thing, my first 2 years of college, got no girls with it because it was a white 1999 Toyota RAV4, a little white box car. Okay, just it didn't last because I didn't pay very much money for it. And then, that thing runs into the dirt. I'm like, okay, I need a new car. So I bought a black Nissan 2004 Nissan Frontier, paid about a little less than $5,000 for it. And it lasted a good bit of time. I had it for 4 years, totaled it in March because people don't know how to drive around here. And, if I hadn't totaled it, I'd still be driving it. I'd probably have it for another 2 or 3 years. And then, because, my Nissan got totaled, my wife and I, we went out and we bought a 2014 Acura RDX. Let's just say we spent a little more than $5,000 on it. Haven't had any issues with it yet. It runs incredibly well. It's great. Okay, and in my short life, I've realized that the more that you pay for something, especially big things, they tend to last longer. Right? They tend to just perform a little bit better. So, I've just kind of reached this point in my life where it's like the important things that I know that I need, I'm going to spend a little bit more money on: housing, cars, electronics. Like this phone that I have, I don't remember how much I spent on it, but I've had it for like a decade and it still works incredibly well. Okay? And I think that the same thing goes for sports. The more that you spend on something, the more that you invest into something, the better it turns out for you. Like you get what you pay for, not only in life, but also in sports. The Steelers, for example, don't have a quarterback this year because they didn't put any money into the position. Okay, they haven't invested in it. The Steelers gave up a 2026 conditional pick for Justin Fields. So in essence, they gave up nothing. They gave up an imaginary pick to get Justin Fields. Okay, and they're paying Russell Wilson $1.2 million this year while the Denver Broncos pick up the rest of the check. Okay, Steelers fans, week 8, week 7, whenever, they're going to look up and wonder why they can't score points. And the answer is simple. The Steelers didn't invest in the quarterback position. Okay, if you want to have a good offense in the NFL, you better invest in that quarterback position, whether it's through hiring an offensive-minded head coach, drafting a quarterback in the first round, or paying a legitimate offseason quarterback like Kirk Cousins. They could have gone out and gotten him, but no, they opted for the cheap option, Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. Okay, the Steelers didn't invest in their quarterback, so their offense is going to struggle because of it. When I look at the Colts, it's the exact same thing. The Colts have a terrible secondary because they haven't invested in it. They haven't put any money into it. Okay, Kenny Moore, a slot corner, a nickelback. Okay, this guy, he is the highest paid defensive back on this Colts roster. His base salary is going to be for a little more than $4 million this year. Okay, which is, a lot of money for us. But by NFL standards, a $4 million contract is not that much money. Okay, the second highest paid defensive back for the Colts is Julian Blackmon, whose base salary is a little over $1 million this year. Once again, that's a lot of money for me. Don't know your financial situation, but for the average person, making a little over $1 million in a year sounds pretty nice. But once again, by NFL standards, that's a cheap contract. Okay, when we look at some of the cornerbacks in this on this Colts roster, Jalen Jones and Dallas Flowers are both going to get a significant amount of playing time this year. One of those two guys is probably going to start and be cornerback number 2. But neither one of those guys is going to make $1 million this year in the NFL. Okay? And they're going to get playing time, a lot of it. Okay, the Colts, this front office, Chris Ballard, they haven't properly invested in their secondary. And we're going to look up, week 3 and be like, geez, why can't we stop anybody? Because this front office hasn't put any money into this, secondary room that is severely lacking. Okay, and when I look around the NFL and I look at the better secondaries in the NFL, guess what those front offices have done? They have invested in it, whether through draft picks, which the Colts haven't done that with their secondary either. Okay, so the best secondaries have invested draft picks and money into those guys. When we look at the Cleveland Browns, who are probably going to have the best secondary in the NFL this year if they can stay healthy, their best cornerback, Denzel Ward, is the 3rd highest paid player on their roster. Their second cornerback is the 14th highest paid player on their roster. No wonder they're going to have one of the better secondaries. They put money into it. When we look at the Miami Dolphins, another team that's going to have a great secondary this year, they're paying Jalen Ramsey a lot of money. They're paying Javon Holland a lot of money. Okay, they've put money into the room, and so therefore they're going to get a better return on their investment. Okay, and I'm preparing you guys now because I've talked ad nauseum how horrendously bad this Colts secondary is. Okay, I've talked about it a lot. I'm just trying to prepare you guys, and I know what's coming. Okay, we're going to look up week 5, week 6, week 7, whenever, and we're going to be like, geez, Gus Bradley sucks. Fire him. Fire Gus Bradley. You don't want that because that is the Chris Ballard scapegoat this year. Okay, we're going to look up. We're going to wonder why the secondary was so terrible, and, a lot of people are going to blame Gus Bradley. I'm telling you right now, it's not Gus Bradley's fault. Okay, the secondary is going to be bad this year because Chris Ballard and this front office have refused to invest in it. They haven't paid any of those guys any sort of money, and they haven't used any high quality draft picks on the room either. Kenny Moore was undrafted. Juju Brents, the highest pick in the room, was a 2nd-round pick. The Colts had a chance with the 15th pick this year to draft a legitimate future cornerback number 1, and they didn't do it. Okay, Jalen Jones, who is potentially going to start this year, was a 7th-round pick. Dallas Flowers, who could potentially start this year if he beats out Jalen Jones, was undrafted. When we sit back in, 7 weeks or whatever, and we were like, geez, this secondary sucks. It's not going to be on Gus Bradley. Okay? This falls squarely on the shoulders of Chris Ballard. He hasn't prioritized this secondary at all. Of course it's not going to be very good. He hasn't put any money into it. He hasn't put any draft picks into it. High quality draft picks, at least. I know he used a 3rd rounder on Julian Blackmon. I know he used a 3rd rounder on Nick Cross. But those guys that go in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th round, flip a coin on whether or not those guys are going to be good. Okay? Once again, if this defense is bad this year, it's not on Gus Bradley. It's going to fall squarely on the shoulders of Chris Ballard because he has completely neglected the secondary. A 30-year-old Kenny Moore and a bunch of young dudes that went undrafted. That is the secondary for the Colts this year. And I don't think it's going to pan out too well for them. And I think we're going to see it on Thursday. I think they're going to get pieced up, even though I don't believe Jamar Chase has reported to camp yet for the Bengals. And I know that T. Higgins just finally showed up. It won't matter, though. Those dudes are going to run wildly free against this Colts secondary. And we're going to run into that all year long because Chris Ballard, in all of his glory, has completely neglected that room and how incredibly important it is. When we come back here in about 4 minutes or so, I've got some gambling advice that I'm going to give out. Really two pieces of it. Early in the year, you should bet the overs. I'm going to tell you why. And the Commanders, over 6.5. Make that bet right now before that number goes up. I'm going to explain why when we come back here in 4 minutes.
More winners, more often. It's the Real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy's Sports Ticket, 1430 AM and 99.5 HD2.
What's going on? Real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy's Sports Ticket. Hope you're having a fantastic Tuesday. It's been a great show. Zach Hicks was great at 11 o'clock. We talked about the importance of, paying guys in the secondary. You get what you pay for. It's a real thing. And now I'm going to do something that I do from time to time. I'm going to give out a little bit of gambling advice, some picks that I like, some things that I'm going to do early in the season. I am not a professional, but, these things seem like they make a little bit of sense. So to start the season, when it comes to, betting on individual games, I'm going to bet the over in most of them. Okay, I think that this new kickoff rule is going to help scoring, not in the idea of, there's going to be kickoff returns for touchdowns and things of that nature. I don't think that we're going to see that. I just think we're going to see better field position in general. Okay, when we look at, the past few years, what happens? Okay, somebody scores, they line it up to kick it off. You go to the bathroom, I go to the bathroom. We all go to the bathroom. And we come back and we're like, oh, what a surprise. They kick the ball through the back of the end zone. Team starts at the 25. Now, since they're now, making it to where you don't want to kick it into the end zone and you have to kick it kind of in this specific area, because of that, guys are returning kicks and teams aren't starting at the 25-yard line. They're starting at the 30, the 35. And then from time to time, there's a big return and teams are starting at the 50. And field position, I'm not going to say it's everything, but it's a pretty fundamental part of the sport. Usually if you win the field position battle, you win the game, right? Because it's just easier to score if you have to go 50 yards as opposed to 75 yards. It's just easier, right? And so because field position is going to be better for teams coming off of these kickoffs, right? Instead of starting at the 25, you're not starting at the 30 or the 35 or wherever. I think that's going to lead to an uptick in points, right? Maybe that it results in an extra touchdown every game. That's an extra 7 points. Okay, so early in the year, I would bet the overs on NFL games just because I think it's going to take Vegas a little bit of time to kind of adjust to how they set their lines based off of this new rule. So that is something that I'm definitely going to be doing. The other thing, this is a season bet. I got to be honest, when it comes to betting in individual games, I'm not great. Okay, I struggle, but long-term season futures, betting the playoffs, things like that, that's really where I do my best work. And look, my favorite over-under bet this year for win totals in the NFL is Broncos over 5.5 wins. Okay, like we've all seen Bo Nix. He looks like he's going to be a pretty good player pretty quickly. Sean Payton, we know he's going to put Bo Nix in the proper places to succeed. I think this Broncos defense is going to get better because it couldn't get much worse than what it was last year. Okay, so that over-under total set at 5.5 feels really low. I think this Broncos team is, they're a 7-win team, 7-10, maybe 8-9. We'll see. The other team that I would bet the over on is the Washington Commanders. The Commanders are going to be one of the most improved teams in the NFL this year. I have no doubt in my mind about that. The Commanders went 4-13 last year. Okay, they had the number 2 overall pick, finished last in the NFC East, which is a relatively tough division with the Eagles and the Cowboys, and the Giants are meh. Okay, their over-under number for wins on the year is set at 6.5. I like the over. I like them to go 7-10, 8-9, somewhere in that range. Once again, that Broncos over 5.5 bet is still my favorite, but I like this number as well for the Commanders. First and foremost, they upgraded at quarterback. I think Jayden Daniels is going to be pretty good. Okay, I definitely think that Jayden Daniels is going to be better than Sam Howell. Okay, right? His speed alone, it's going to be a lot for the defenses to have to game plan and get ready for. He adds a whole new element to their offense. Cliff Kingsbury, offensive coordinator, found some success with Kyler in Arizona and his running ability. So I like kind of his ability to run the ball, but he's also thrown the ball well in these preseason games, right? The first game he played in, he only played one drive. He was like 2 for 3, dropped in a beautiful deep ball and then scampered in for a touchdown. And then against the Dolphins on Saturday night, he was like 10 for 12, throwing the ball all over the yard. Okay, so I think the Commanders are going to be better at quarterback, which you would think would lead to more wins. They also hired a new head coach, Dan Quinn. Okay, like that's a defensive-minded guy. He had success in Atlanta as a head coach, was a really good defensive coordinator in Dallas after he got fired in Atlanta. Like this guy knows defense. He is an upgrade over Ron Rivera. Okay, he's going to have that defense playing well. And Cliff Kingsbury, like him or not, that guy knows and understands the offensive side of the football, right? So I like both of those things. I think that, Jaden Daniels, new head coach, and Dan Quinn, that favors the idea of the Commanders improving. The biggest thing, though, and the thing that I really want to harp on is turnover differential. Turnovers are a luck stat. They are. Okay, because I think that teams don't really force turnovers. I think that quarterbacks make mistakes. I really think it's more of that than anything else. Like when you look at, when quarterbacks throw interceptions, it's like, the defense didn't do anything crazy. The quarterback just made a bad decision, right? And when it comes to running backs fumbling the ball, very rarely is a guy going for a strip, right? They're just, they're locked up in a block and they just kind of throw their arm out and they somehow, some way hit the ball and it pops free. Okay, like that is what most turnovers look like. Okay, so turnovers, it's a luck stat. And the Commanders last year were last in turnover differential. That won't be the case again this year because, once again, turnovers are a luck stat. So they're better at quarterback. Dan Quinn is the new head coach, and I think he's going to do a good job. And the turnover margin won't be as bad this year as it was last year. And when we look at the history of the NFL, we look at teams that improve from one year to the next, there is a solid pattern that we see that teams that are last in turnover margin tend to improve. Okay? And if you don't believe me, I have a lot of examples. Colts, 2022. They went 4-12-1. In 2022, the Colts were last in turnover margin at -13. 2023, turnover margin was +2. So they weren't, forcing a ton of turnovers, but they went 9-8 last year. Okay, they doubled their amount of wins. 2021, the Jaguars, guess what they were? They were last in turnover margin at -20. The following year, they were much improved at +5. Okay, 2021, they went 3-14. The following year, they went 9-8. They tripled their win total. 2020, the Broncos were last in turnover margin at -17. Okay, they went 5-11 that year. Next year, 2021, their turnover margin was +1, and they went 7-10. They improved their wins by 2 games. The Chargers in 2019 and 2020, they went from going 5-11 to 7-9. Okay, like this is a constant pattern that we see, and sometimes we see major leaps. Now, I don't think that the Commanders are going to go from 4-12 to like 12-4, like we've seen teams do in the past. For example, 2018, 49ers were last in turnover margin. Okay, they went 4-12 that year. Okay, they had a turnover margin of -23. The next year, they had a turnover margin of +4, and they went 13-3. Major leap in wins. Okay, and like we've seen this before. 2015 Cowboys last in turnover margin. They went 4-12. The next year, they went 13-3. Okay, teams that are last in turnover margin are always better the next year because the chances of you being that unlucky 2 years in a row, like the chances of that just aren't very high. And so when we look at the Commanders and we look at the upgrades that they've made at quarterback, okay, Jaden Daniels, he's going to be better than Sam Howell. I can say that pretty confidently. Dan Quinn is going to be a better coach than Ron Rivera. I can say that pretty confidently. Okay, so they upgraded it. What are the 2 most important positions on a football team, head coach and quarterback. And they're coming off of a season where they were extremely unlucky. And they aren't going to be that unlucky again when it comes to turnovers. Because once again, turnovers are a luck stat. Okay, they are a luck stat. Right? And it greatly impacts wins and losses, right? Like if you turn the ball over 2 times in a game and your opponent doesn't turn it over at all, then, history tells us that you're probably going to lose that game. Okay, because that is just how things work. NFL, college, whatever. Speaking of college football, coming up right around the corner. Can't wait. We have football games, college football games on Saturday. Learned last night that I will be heading down to Auburn, Alabama, September 21st to watch a college football game down there. I can't wait. I love college football. It's coming up. It's right around the corner. Juiced up for that. I'm losing weight. Okay. Weighed 177.2 pounds this morning. Feeling great. Putting up numbers on the bench press. Life is just, heading in the proper direction. That's going to do it for the Real Jonathan Smith Show. Thanks for tuning in. Head over to YouTube, subscribe to Indy's Sports Ticket. Join the live stream tomorrow. Join the chat. Join the conversation. Coming up in 5 minutes, it's the Dan Dockett Show. Sean Salisbury, I know, is set to join us at 1 o'clock. Should be a great show. That is coming your way here in about 5 minutes.